Really?
We always do this. We always do this.
You can hear us better. We can hear you better. However,
if you really want to look at the back, you look at the back. That's fine. It's not like my thing this morning where I forced everybody to come down to the front and move their chairs and sit around a very inappropriate table because that's all we had. But we did it.
Alrighty. Well, I hope you're all here for the interview with Joe Walton, because that is what, in fact, is going to take place here. I'm Cath Jackel, and I'm doing the interview because I've been a fan of Joe's work since I stumbled across The King's Peace, her first novel. And what we're going to do is Joe Walton and I will do a short introduction. We'll chit-chat for a bit. I've asked Joe to read a short prose selection. For those of you who didn't get the chance to hear her last night.
Yeah, actually, we could vote. We could vote.
The poetry was wonderful, but your prose is wonderful too. And then we'll set aside some time afterwards for questions. So Joe is a Welsh-born Canadian citizen. Yes?
I'm actually only a landed immigrant, but I'm probably going to be a citizen in March.
Okay, well,
I'm still working on that. I'm still learning all that stuff about what time zones there are, and what the capitals of all the provinces are. No, there's an exam. I bet you don't know half this stuff. my son, who is also doing the same citizenship thing with me, was testing his girlfriend on it, and his girlfriend is Montreal local. And not only that, she's half Mohawk. She's about as local as you possibly can be. She doesn't know any of it. she was so failing this citizenship test. But I'm probably going to actually do it when I come back from. I'm doing a West Coast signing tour in January, and when I come back from that, I'm going to schedule my exam for actually being a citizen. And right now, I'm only a landed immigrant, but I'm a wannabe Canadian. I'm a volunteer.
That's what I get for trusting Wikipedia.
Well, the reason the Wikipedia's got that is because there's a guy called Neil Harrison who runs Vector for the British Science Fiction Association, their magazine, and he wanted to have me in his list of British authors, and I told him in no uncertain terms that I was not a British author, and he wasn't putting me in his list. And I think that I may have been sufficiently emphatic that somebody said that I was a Canadian citizen in Wikipedia, but they're only a little bit ahead. I am ethnically British, I'm ethnically Welsh. I'll never really be Canadian, though my son is. But I am a volunteer Canadian, and British publishing has done nothing for me, and British writers have done nothing for me. Canada's given me a writing community, and I'm published on this side of the Atlantic and not on that side, and they're not going to claim me. I emigrated for a reason, you know. Yeah.
All right. Well, we're glad to have you. I'm sitting here with my security blanket of a list, but I think we're just going to wander.
Okay. No, you ask me questions, and I'll give sensible grown-up answers. We won't wander all over the place.
Now I have to be sensible.
Yeah.
Okay.
Flicks through several pages.
So backing up, just so I can get through the list here, your first novel was The King's Peace, which was published in 2000, and that, I think, resulted in you getting the John Campbell Award for Best New Writer in 2001.
No, 2002. 2002. Both of the Cillian books were out before I got that. The King's Peace and The King's Name are essentially one book that was published in two parts. I mean, you know, it's long, but it's one work. And those were both out. King's Peace came out in 2000 and The King's Peace came out in 2001. I was nominated for Campbell in 2001, but I didn't win. And then I won it in 2002.
Well, a great start.
And actually, I went to Philadelphia to the Worldcon in 2001. It was my honeymoon because Emma and I had just got married. It was our honeymoon. And we kept telling everybody we were going to Philadelphia on honeymoon. And either they knew we were going to the Worldcon, in which case it was fine, or they'd never heard of Philadelphia anyway because they were Emma's Irish relatives, and that was also fine. But yeah, it was great, and I had such a great time losing the Campbell. It was terrific. Everybody was lovely to me, and I got to go to the Hugo Awards, and it was all wonderful. And then the year after, we just moved to Canada in the February, and we had no money. We had zero money because of all the expensive shipping all our books. So and Walton was in San Diego. I mean, if we'd been in Philadelphia again, I could have gone, but it was in San Diego, and no, San Jose. And it was just impossible. There was just no way I could afford to go, so I didn't go, and I won. And they rang me up at like 2 in the morning to tell me that I'd won. And so there was this voice at the end of the phone, and it was saying that I'd won, but what I could hear was all these people having a good time in a party. And it was 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was, well, you know, everybody else was asleep, so I feel like I had a miserable time winning after I had a great time losing. But it was very nice to win. It's a strange award because it's an award for Best New Writer. But many new writers are not in fact eligible for it because it's only for work that's done in the first 2 years of your career. And many people publish short work, or they publish a novel that's not really their best, and then they become really good, and maybe their second novel will be really good, or they'll publish their first novel and it'll be brilliant, but they've been publishing short stories for 3 years, so they're not eligible. So it's only open to people whose career just happens to time it kind of right. Which is peculiar. It would be better if we had a Best First Novel Award, I think. But nevertheless, it's a wonderful accolade winning it, and it means that the Finnish community sort of think that you're great and you're going to succeed, and it certainly made me very happy. Eventually. when I finally got it, and I had some sleep, and everybody else wasn't having a good time in San Jose.
So those, you mentioned the Sulian books,
yeah.
Are kind of one story split into two, and then there was the prize in the game,
which is set
in the same world.
Yeah.
And all of those, it seems to me, I mean, you had obviously read all of the Arthur stories and the Celtic work, and you had some things you wanted to say to those texts.
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
And what sort of spurred this on? Did you think they hadn't thought something through, or do you wish it had come out differently?
Actually, well, yeah. I mean, who wouldn't want the Arthurian stories to come out differently? No, I was having a discussion in email with a friend in Kingston about feudalism and why feudalism is better than slavery. Because feudalism is a genuine human advance on what they had before, which was slavery, okay? And the good thing about feudalism is the links go both ways. Everybody's in the middle. You don't have despotism. Everybody's got responsibilities in both directions. And to make a point in this conversation, I wrote a poem from the point of view of a woman who, in her youth, had been a knight and had gone and had fun being a knight, fighting people on a horse with a lance. And now she was middle-aged and she was responsible for a lot of people, and she was bringing the fighting people of her people to war, not for fun, but because it was duty. And after I'd written this poem, well, not the whole internet went down, but my ISP went down, as happened in those days of dial-up. And I couldn't send it. So I kept sort of looking at and trying to send it, and the internet wasn't coming back. And every time I looked at it, I thought a different thing. And one of the things I thought was, there's never been a historical time when a woman could have actually said this. And it was first person. And there have been women who fought throughout history. There have been loads of women who fought. But they all fought because they really wanted to, or because it was dire necessity. There weren't any women who fought because they wanted to, and then it was their duty to go fight. They could always say, no, I'm a girl. It was never their duty to go and fight. And this was about feudalism and your feudal duty to go and fight. and your responsibility to the people. So I started making up a world background that this poem could be in. 300,000 words later. That's where it was. I mean, yes, I did want to write an Arthurian with women in that wasn't Marion Zimmer Bradley's vile Mists of Avalon, a book that I truly hate. Never ever write anything that is set somewhere you haven't been. Because she has, in Mists of Avalon, she has people do journeys which you can't do now with a car on highways. And she has them do them on foot in a time that you couldn't do now in a car. If you've been there, and your readers will have been there, just don't, you know? No, I hate Mists of Avalon. So I wanted to do a different kind of Arthurian with women, and with different kind of women. And then I just really got into it, you know, wrote it. And I wrote Prizing the Game because it seemed to me that the backstory of these characters was really obvious, and it was really obviously coming from the Irish Tembo Coolie. But very few of my readers knew the Tame, so I thought, well, I guess I could write that as a novel, which I did. That is my least successful novel, and is my worst selling novel. I think, do you want to lift it up? I think it has something to do with the cover.
We can pass it around, perhaps.
Because it really is a kind of awful cover, and it's orange. And the spine is green, and it's kind of awful. And has anybody read it? No, didn't sell at all. It did not sell, really. After the King's Peace earned out, the King's Name did pretty well. But Prizing the Game completely flopped. If I had not already had a contract to write another novel, my career might have sunk at that point. With that awful brown tub chariot that looks like a barrel. Yeah. Yep. And I thought, have they not seen Gladiator, which was a fairly new film then, you know? And have they not even seen Ben-Hur? Do they not know what a chariot is? Yeah.
Certainly didn't do the story inside any favors.
Yeah, it looks like a Conan book. But yeah.
So you had a contract, though, for one more book.
Yeah.
And were you intending to write Tooth and Claw at that point?
No, I was going to write another historical fantasy, but basically after writing 3 historical fantasies, or to put it another way, 400,000 words of historical fantasy, I was so bored with historical fantasy, and I didn't really want to do that at all. So the book I was supposed to write was going to be, it was going to be a fantasy version of the Clearances with some fantasy French Revolution in it. And I wrote a proposal for it, but I never actually wrote the book. I wrote like 10,000 words of it. I can write 10,000 words of anything. And then I got the idea for Tooth and Claw, and I just wrote Tooth and Claw. I sent Patrick the beginning of Tooth and Claw and said, "Will this be okay?" And he said, "Yeah." He said it's charmingly creepy. What Tooth and Claw was ahead of its time, because it's a Victorian novel in which all the characters are dragons and eat each other, and you know, arrange their marriage portions and fret about religion, like people in Victorian novels. But they're also dragons who eat each other. And in fact, it came out in 2003 and it won the World Fantasy Award in 2004. And if I'd been slower writing it and it had come out at the same time as Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, it probably would have been a bestseller, because it's a much better book than Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. No, I mean, that's not saying much, you know.
Yes, how much, I must confess I haven't read him myself, although it's on the list now, Anthony Trollope.
Mm-hmm.
Where did you find, like, you read a lot outside of genre?
Yeah,
and
I just read a lot. There's not enough genre to keep me going. Yeah, no, I read Trollope. I read Trollope when I was a kid, because we had a lot of Victorian books at home. And I've now read all of Trollope, but I haven't read all of Trollope, but I've read some Trollope, and I'd kind of forgotten about it. It's not really the kind of thing you like when you're a child. Oh yeah, somebody said, I'm trying to remember who it was, Ellen Kushner, I think. Ellen Kushner talked about how in Trollope novels, you get characters from one novel commenting on the action of another novel in his series. And I thought that seemed really interesting, and I couldn't remember that. Mm-hmm. So I started to read his Barchester series and the Palliser series. Mm-hmm. And I was halfway through The Small House in Allington, which is book 4 of the Barchester series. And Ursula Le Guin's The Other Wind came in the library. So I went to the library to get it, and I started reading The Other Wind, because while I like The Small House in Allington, The Small House in Allington is not, you know, a new Ursula Le Guin novel. And so Emmett, my husband, came home from work, and I was sitting reading The Other Wind. And he said, how is it? How is your book? And I said, it's okay, but she doesn't really understand dragons, which is my complaint about The Other Wind, is that Ursula Le Guin has lost track of what her dragons mean in the earlier books in the series. And he looked at me as if I was completely mad, and he said, Trollope doesn't understand dragons. Yeah, and just as he was saying that, I got the complete idea for Tooth and Claw. Because I realised that Trollope understood dragons really, really well. What he did not understand was human beings, particularly the female half of the species. Because the way my dragons, when a female dragon is golden, but when she becomes engaged, preferably, or when she gets too close to a male, she imprints on the male and she turns pink. And a bride is pink, and then they become redder as they produce eggs. And an old dowager dragon is quite red. But a maiden dragon is gold, and a pink dragon is not engaged, is a ruined dragon. And this is what Trollope does with women. He genuinely believes that women imprint on the first man they love. And he really believes that, and he uses it as plot theory. You can't love somebody else once you've fallen in love. You're stuck on them, and they might as well turn pink because everybody can tell. You know, not that they've had sex. They haven't had sex. They've just stood too close to this man and now they love him. and it shows. It shows. So that's where that came from. And I just worked out the whole biology and social structure and everything while Emmett was still laughing at the fact that he confused Trollope and Ursula Le Guin. And I thought I could write Tooth and Claw. The plot of Tooth and Claw comes from not The Small House in Allington, which is just too weird, but the one before it, Framley Parsonage. Mm-hmm. And when I started writing it, it got really baroque and it got well away from the plot of Framley Parsonage. It's not really, it's sort of inspired by a concept of the plot of Framley Parsonage. But it makes me annoyed when people say that it's Pride and Prejudice with dragons, because it's totally not. It's Framley Parsonage with dragons. And it also makes me annoyed when people say that it's so unique and you've never read anything like it, because in fact it's identical to Framley Parsonage except with dragons.
Yeah, this is what happens when we don't read outside our genre.
But I just read a lot of stuff. I read a lot of trash. I read a lot in genre. I read a lot outside genre. I read fast. Mm-hmm. And if you read fast, you read a lot. If you read slowly, I recommend you only read great works of literature and my books. But if you read quickly, you know, goodness me, you know, you can just read everything, and that's fine.
So far as I can tell, looking at your live journal posts and your Tor.com essays and so on,
yeah.
Not only do you read incredible amounts of stuff, but you have time to write about it.
Well, they pay me, you know.
Well, I noticed that the amount of content in that area on your live journal is going down.
Yeah,
because, of course,
yeah,
if you can get paid for it.
Yeah, that's right.
But things, I don't know how many of you are following this. If you aren't, you should. Jo has been doing things like reading her way through all the year's worth of Hugo winners and doing a kind of a wrap-up about each year and whether things are still in print and her opinions on whether or not they should have
Yeah, whether they're worthy nominees and things that were left out.
Because
Other things that came out that year and got left out. I didn't actually read, I've read most of them, but I didn't reread everything. I only reread things I felt like rereading. But I did, yeah, I talked about every year and everything that was nominated in every year. It was a lot of fun. I enjoyed doing it. Yeah.
And then there was the sort of A to Z through your home library shelves.
Yeah, where you start reading different authors. Yeah. But the main thing I do is I write about what I'm rereading, which is great because I hate reviewing. Because when you review, you got new books and you might not want to say mean things about something when you might be on a panel with the author, or even worse, an awards list. No, it's not ethical. You can't do it. And if I only write about what I'm rereading, I'm pre-selecting for things I like, or where the author is safely dead and I can say what I like. Or, you know, there are some writers who are much bigger than me, but there are other writers who are kind of smaller than me, and if I hate their book, and I say I hate their book, they feel like I'm blighting their career, and I'm not, and I'm certainly not on purpose, but there's a way in which it won't help, so I really don't want to do that, so I almost don't review. I only review things I know I'm going to like, and even then, sometimes I'm wrong, and I have to say, oops, sorry, not going to review that. Happened recently with Neil Stephenson's Rindy. I have liked his last 5 books a great deal, and the 3 books before that I thought were kind of interesting and sort of liked them. So I was pretty sure I would like it, but I didn't. And I started to write this review, ripping it to shreds, and then I thought, no, better not. And gave it back instead. But generally I don't review, I write about old books. And I write about older books, books that I like, books that have been overlooked, books that I've got something interesting to say about. My remit for what I do on Tor.com, when I started doing it, Patrick Nielsen Hayden said, whenever we meet, you say smart things about books that nobody else has thought about for years. And that's what I want you to do, so that's what I'm doing. And I'm doing a collection of these pieces, which is going to be the best 125 out of the first 500 that I've done. And this collection, it'll be out next year, and it's called, What Makes This Book So Great? Isn't that a wonderful title? I was so pleased when I thought of that. Yeah. It's like we have a colon. What makes this book so great? Colon. Joe Walton. But no, it's I really like that, and it's all we've sorted out what's going in it, which pieces are going to be in it, and with an emphasis on things that are talked about less, rather than sort of really well-known books. It's books that are talked about less, or books that are talked about a lot but only gossiped about, like Bujold's Miles books. They're talked about a lot, but there's not been very much serious discussion of them as a series and the things that they're doing. And I did a chronological reread of them, talking about the order they were published and looking at them as a series, and that's absolutely going in the book. Yeah, so all these things are available totally for free on the internet and will remain available, but also there's going to be a collection for libraries and weird completists and mad fans. No, I don't know. I don't know who the heck's going to buy this book, but anyway, yeah.
For John Scalzi.
Yeah, well, for John Scalzi. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, coming from tour next year.
All right, we'll keep an eye open for it.
Yeah, but if you're interested in stuff about old books, just read the posts that I make. I'm going to keep on doing them, and we have pretty good discussion in the comment threads. It's lightly moderated and it's pretty intelligent. It does not descend into mud, so it's, yeah.
Neat. Well, in amongst all the reading and the rereading, you've also kept on writing. So moving chronologically along, next up was the Small Change series.
Yeah.
And again, we had part of this discussion earlier about Josephine Tay, is you had read some other books and you had some things you wanted to say to Tay and to Sayers and to various other people, I think. That's what it looked like to me.
Well, sort of, but no, it wasn't actually that. What it was it was 2003, okay, and Britain and the US were waging an illegal war of aggression in Iraq. And I was brought up by people for whom the formative experience of their life was World War II. My grandparents got married in 1938, and World War II cut across their lives. Everything in their lives was before and after. And I was brought up by my grandparents, and so World War II was this huge thing. And seeing my country waging an aggressive war when I wasn't in it, because I was already in Montreal. And Canada wasn't waging an aggressive war, we were in Afghanistan, but we were not doing that. So if I'd been in Britain, I would have been on marches and all this kind of thing, but I wasn't. And my husband's Irish, and my friends in Montreal are Canadian. So I was isolated in feeling that it was they were doing it in my name, it was my responsibility. They were doing this. And it makes you, and I have voted for Tony Blair. Not that time, but the previous time, the first time he was elected, I voted for him. So somebody I had voted for was waging an illegal aggressive war, and this made me very, very angry with nowhere to go with this anger. And where it really went is into farthing. Because I realised I was rereading Josephine Tay's Brat Farah, and Josephine Tay is all comfort reading for me. And I realised that Brat Farah there was no time in which Brat Farah could be set, because it was published in 1952, and things in it happened 10 years ago in France. And 10 years ago in France is 1942, and there's no way that English people were going there on holiday and getting killed in a plane crash on the way back. And so I thought, what world does this happen in? And I thought this happens in a world where World War II ended in 1941 before the US came in and Hitler's got the continent. And I read the rest of Brat Farah knowing that Hitler had up to the edge of the continent and these people were having a murder mystery. And this was an interesting experience. And it occurred to me that murder mysteries, 1930s cozy detective stories, are about violent death. Yet, they are cozy reading experiences with crumpets and cups of tea and, you know, a little romance going on in there, even though they're about violent death. And I thought, you know, I could use this technique of cozy mysteries to write about fascism and to write about countries doing awful things. And just at about the time I thought this, we were getting the news from Abu Ghraib. And the American soldiers not only torturing people, but taking holiday snaps of torturing people, with them standing there with a big smile next to the people they were torturing. And I thought, yeah, people do awful things. And wouldn't it be interesting to write a book about why good people do awful things? And that was farthing, and I wrote it in 3 weeks. It is the fastest I've ever written anything. My hands were not shaped like hands at the end of this experience. Actually I read all my books in 3 weeks. It's just 3 weeks spread out over a year, because I get stuck. But I never got stuck, and Farthing just came out like that. And it's an alternate history, and it's a murder mystery, and it is an attempt to replicate the experience of reading Brat Farah knowing that Hitler is up to the channel, which I'm sure was not Josephine Tay's intention at all. But yeah. And then after I'd finished it, I did a load of research, because I'd written it too quickly to do research. And I already knew a lot about the history, and I already knew a lot about cozy mysteries, and I'd read a lot of them. But I did a lot of research and checking things. But I had no intention of writing anything else in that world. I couldn't imagine there was anything else in that world. Farthing ends on a kind of not exactly a cliffhanger, but it ends in a place where you don't know what's going to happen to the characters. But that's where I wanted it to end. That's where I absolutely intended to stop it. And then when I was doing the post-book research, I was simultaneously reading Nancy Mitford's Love in a Cold Climate, and a book called 580 Hamlets, which was written by a theatre critic about 85 productions of Hamlet that he'd seen over his career. And I suddenly thought, wouldn't it be interesting if one of the Midford sisters had been an actress and she was going to play Hamlet having a female Hamlet, because none of these 85 Hamlets was a female Hamlet. And I wanted to direct a female Hamlet, and then I thought, well, I can direct a female Hamlet in that world, and Hitler could be going to see it, and people could be intending to bomb him in the theatre, and the actress could get involved in this plot, and my detective from the first book could stop it, and that would be fun. And while we're at it, I could do one 10 years later with a happy ending. So I did. So first there was just Farthing, and then there was Halfpenny and Half a Crown. And I wrote the proposal, well, it was actually just email, but I wrote a very informal proposal for both books, and sold both books without having written anything of either of them. And I wrote both of them then. But actually before that, I'd written half of Lifeload. And then after, in between Halfpenny and Half a Crown, I think, I wrote the other half of Lifeload, I forget. But I wrote Lifeload during the same time I was writing the Small Change books.
Wow.
I'd written some of it before I wrote Farthing.
But just that I can't encompass the mental switching.
No, it's awful. I had to do the copy edit of Farthing while I was writing Lifeload, and I felt like Farthing is a sharp little needle of a book, and Lifeload is this great big messy knitting project with ends sticking out all over, and it didn't help. It really did not help. But it was published afterwards, but actually it was written kind of before and during. Yeah.
So how about at this point you tell people what a Lifeload is? This book didn't get wide distribution yet.
No, I still don't like Lifeload, that's the problem. It was a very, very hard book to write, and the harder something is to write, the less I like it. So I really like Farthing because I wrote it in 17 days, and there it was. And it's also a very clear book and like a sharp little needle, whereas Lifeload is a difficult book. And it was published by Nesford Press when I was guest of honour at Moscow, and it was published in a limited edition of 800, and they're now publishing another 800. So it's not going to get wide distribution. If you want it, you have to buy it from them or from Amazon. And there's only ever going to be a hardcover. This kind of sucks actually, but it's a very weird book. A Lifeload, it's a Middle English word, and it means, it's the word that developed into the word livelihood, the way you make your living. But it means that, but it also means the direction in which your life points, as in lodestone. Yeah. So it's your career, but it's also your vocation. It is your thing. And you have to discover your Lifeload and what your Lifeload is. And what Lifeload is as a book, it's set in a very strange fantasy world. And it is an attempt to write a book that is small scale and female centered and with an older woman protagonist and doing all this stuff that nobody does. And nobody does it because it's hard. I thought Ursula Le Guin's Tahanu is a failed book, and I still think it's a failed book, but I admire it a lot more now that I've tried to do it and I've seen how impossible it is to do. And Lifeload is written as if everything is happening all at once. The central character, Taveth, can see, when she looks at somebody, she can see their past selves and their future selves. So she might look at you and she would see the little boy you used to be and the old man that you will be. And they might be sort of signalling different things from what you're signalling now. And her life experience is like that all the time. Everything is like that for her. And so the book is like that. And everything happens at once, and it's all in present tense. And the family that is central to it is a polyamorous family with 4 adults who are kind of married to each other, and there's also kids, and it's mainly about the time when their grandmother comes back from the east, and time runs differently. They have literal time zones, And so she's been away for what to her is about 15 years, and to them is 3 generations, four generations. And in the West, time runs at the opposite speed. It's about this little medieval village, and the grandmother comes back and the gods are angry with her. And it's just a mess, actually. I don't know why anybody would want to read it. I had a terrible copy edit experience with Lifeload because it's all in the present tense and because everything happens at once. The copy editor got very confused and it was horrible. It was just horrible. I hated it. And I'm not sure I actually got that book to work, but it won the Mythopoeic Award, so I now have to be nice about it because otherwise I'm insulting the Mythopoeic Society who gave it their award and suggesting that their taste is not good if I say I don't like it. So trust them. Spent loads of money buying this big mess of book. It's very peculiar. You like it?
I did.
you tell them about it.
Well, it's going to be a big sprawling mess of a description.
I could read you some actually. If you want me to read something,
sure.
I could read you the beginning of Lifeload because it actually reads much better than it describes. Oh, also it's got a recycled cover. When Nestor do books, they get the author guest of honour to give them something to be a book. It's usually a collection. This is the only time they've ever actually done. Somebody said, well, actually, you know, I don't have enough stuff for a collection, but I've got a weird novel lying around you might like. And they get the artist guest of honour to do the cover. And generally they do a cover, but what's his name, Stephen Martiniere, just gave them a bit of a cover that had been used before. This is part of Brandon Sanderson's Elantris cover. And so it's a re-gifted cover. And I will read you the very beginning. If you go far enough to the west, they say, you come to the lands where people are like statues, going through the day's round the same each day out of pure routine. Contrariwise, if you set off east, people become fair and stranger, more powerful maybe, but less able to remember who they are from moment to moment, until at last they run together and separate as fast as rainbows on oil, and only the gods can keep themselves whole. Between these extremes fall the marches, where folk have wit and will enough to keep themselves to themselves. Applecirk lies close to the centre of the marches, more easterly than some places and more westerly than others. Yea, they have, enough for everyday needs, but not enough to be too much of a distraction for getting on with life. Applecirk is a village of near 800 souls, lying in a valley between high wooded hills on both sides of the little river Rassel. It's not much more than a cluster of wood and stone houses, a nemmet with a spire whose stable priest follows Learcam, a mill beside the swift-flowing Rassel, and a sturdy old manor house where live the gentry of the place. The weather rolls round in season, and the crops and animals grow well, and little do the folk of Applecirk lack, either in the way of tangible or intangible blessings. Not much comes to disturb them. Now and then a caravan winds through from east or west, pack horses tramping in the road's dust, bringing news and the occasional traveller, sacks of rice and beans and spices from the west, or taking great cones of winter sweet east to the lands of ever summer. From time to time a youth will steal off, east or west as their fancy leads them, and perhaps come back in a handful of days or years, changed by their journeying. Season by season, different annual priests come to Applecirk in the time laid down by the nemmet, bringing the worship of the other gods to the villagers one by one. In their proper times, pedlars come through, opening their packs to tempt the folk of Applecirk with gauds from far away. The Rassel flows ever by, singing of rocks and the snow of distant mountains. The winds blow over Applecirk, and sometimes a wind out of the east will bring with it glowing Meltemi clouds and old moods, which settle on the folk of Applecirk like a badly fitting cloak. So, it is the custom there to keep Yeana hanging in the windows of all rooms, and especially rooms where anyone sleeps. It's an easy enough thing for those aware to shake off most wind-borne moods, but harder when they come in sleep and filter into dreams. For the most part, all goes on well enough. The people of Applecirk spend their lives concerned with their work. They fall in and out of love, endure sickness and recover, give birth to children and bring them up to become adults. Their stories are all tiny eddies in the great story that is life. Ranel, who farms the manor lands for the Lord Ferrand, journeys off west every year in spring to Margam, where his parents still live, driving with him their sheep, fat and fleecy, and bringing back a thinned flock, bare and sheared. Although a month or so may have passed for him, when he returns, it seems to Applecurk only a day or so later. Things happen, oh, things happen, and are so important that those they happen to feel their hearts must break. It all will be the same in 100 years. For a while, Applecurk remembers, but in the end, everything that happens becomes the past and is forgotten, as it is everywhere. Then after that, it gets weird.
So I just, before we go on doing a time check here, I thought we had until 1:45, is that right?
I was told until 1:30.
Oh.
I could be wrong.
Okay, well, do people have places they need to be?
This is the last one
Okay.
of the day, so.
So I was sorting this out in my head as taking an hour, so unless, if we don't have to be out of here right away.
I don't think so.
Okay.
We could do questions, or you go.
One more question from me, and then we'll take questions from the room. Now, which one do I have to pick? A little bit about Among Others, which is your latest book, just before we sort of open things up.
It's very
So-
orange.
Let's hope this orange is better luck for you. I'd like to begin with a quotation from Patrick Nielsen Hayden, who says, "I am not Welsh or female. I do not walk with a cane, and I do not have a dead sibling or a parent who wants me dead. I never attended a boarding school. My family is far-flung and American, and I have never, to the best of my knowledge, conversed with fairies. And yet, to a startling extent, Among Others feels like a book about the experience of being me when I was, like Maury, 15. This turns out to be a fairly common reaction to reading Walton's novel, at least among the kind of people I tend to know. It is quite possibly the best thing I've ever read about the way people of our ilk, when young, use books and reading to, in the words of Robert Charles Wilson, light the way out of a difficult childhood." And first of all, that book for me, I thank you so much. We're about the same age, and although we don't have the same sort of countries of growing up and so on, that experience of growing up in the 80s, being a female science fiction fan, and discovering science fiction, and wow, there's this book, I never thought of the things in this book.
Yeah.
That experience of finding myself in a book has been unusual, and it's been a gift to me. So, and you know, that's not, before we go on, a lot of people I've noticed in the reviews are saying, oh, it's all about growing up reading SF. But to me, it was simply about growing up. So anything you want to sort of tell people about what you were doing with that?
Well, Among Others grew out of a post on my Life journal in which I was annoyed with people in North America writing things set in Wales and Ireland and using very romanticised views of Wales and Ireland that came from history rather than them being real countries now. And so I wrote this little essay which was called The Industrial Landscape of Elfland. And it was about where I grew up in a post-industrial part of Wales. And it was just really a description of the place I grew up. And me, I mean, I was in this description because it was about me growing up. And it ended, we played that we were in The Lord of the Rings, but really we were in the Chrysalids. It was a post-apocalyptic world. And 900 people said, you should turn this into a novel. And I said, don't be a moron, it's a description of me growing up. 899 times. No, I mean, really, it was about like 70 people. And then a person said it who was Michelle Segara. I don't know if you're familiar with her work. She also writes as Michelle West, Toronto writer, brilliant. And I thought, good God, she should know better than to say there should be a book. She knows how to write books. You can see that there is no story here. This is just a thing. And I thought, well, actually, maybe, you know, she's not an idiot. Maybe there is a story here and I'm just missing it. And I thought, if there's a story here, it's about me. And it's very hard to write about yourself. I know they tell you to write what you know, but it's dreadful advice. It's much easier to write things that you've researched. It's much easier to research history than to research your own life. And I had a kind of weird life. It was a long time ago, which helps. But I mean, I was 45 when I wrote it, and it's about when I was 15. And also, it's got a lot more magic in than there was in my real life. It's got fairies and magic, and it's actually I love the magic system in it. I had a lot of fun with the magic system because it's this world, so it's got to be deniable magic. So it's plausibly deniable magic, and because it's me. It's about growing up, and it's growing up reading science fiction and growing up within science fiction, and learning things from books rather than from people, because books are easier than people. And it's written in the form of a diary. And I thought the way to write about this is to write about going away to boarding school. I can't write it, you know, there. And then I just saw how to do it. And I did it. And among others, came out in January this year. It went back to press. It's far and away sold more copies than anything else of mine. Well, Farthing has sold more in hardcover and paperback together, but Farthing came out like in 2006. And it's sold more in hardcover than anything else. It's selling really well. It's coming out in paperback in January. And I have bookmarks if anybody would like a bookmark. And it's doing really well, and it's mostly had really good reception from people who are all, I'll put them there and get them if you want. People who are all, you know, like Cath and Patrick, feeling that they see themselves in it. But I hope you realise this also makes you a psychopath, because there was one review of it which started off, you know, autobiographical, semi-autobiographical this, autobiographical that, and then it goes on to say the character strikes me as being a psychopath. She's got definite sociopathic tendencies. She's a psychopath. And I was actually quite hurt by this. Which, you know, it's a vulnerability if you do write about your own life. If somebody says that one of my other characters is a psychopath, I mean, Halfpenny, in fact, the character is a psychopath. And it's fine, you know, you're supposed to notice that she is not actually normal. But yeah, no, I was quite hurt. And I had friends staying with me at the time when I saw this review, and we were talking about this. And then I suddenly realised, in the course of chatting about it, what the proper response to be called a psychopath is, which is, wah. That's the only possible thing you could say. And my friend who was staying with me thought that was hilarious. She said, you've got to post that in your journal because that's so funny. So I did post that in my journal, and I was accused of responding to a review. And people were saying I was as bad as Anne Rice and all of this kind of thing, because I did that. Because then, when I posted that, my friends in the comments said, well, actually, you're not a psychopath, and neither is the character. But apart from that review saying that I was a psychopath, it's generally had a really good response. It's had great reviews, and people have liked it, and young people have liked it. Because the other thing psychopath guys said was that only people in their 40s would enjoy it, and that it wouldn't have anything to say to young people because they didn't read those books in the 70s and 80s, and their experience growing up now is different from our experience of growing up, because they've got the internet and, you know, they're not lonely. Though I was in Morinville on Thursday, and Morinville is a heck of a lot more like where I grew up than Edmonton or Montreal, yeah. Morinville's got a library that is the centre of its community, and Morinville has got kids, teenagers in its library who are really, really needing books and community and all that stuff. You know, boy, they are me. And I've had a lot of really great response from young people reading it and identifying. So that's great. That's really good. That makes me very happy. And I'm really pleased with how well it's doing. When the paperback comes out in January, the trade paperback, it ought to be everywhere. It ought to be in all bookshops and in quite big quantities. So please buy it. if you think you might like it. Or you can buy it on the Kindle right now. It's pretty much, the hardcover is pretty much sold out. And they won't reprint now because the paperback is coming out in January. But the ebook edition is still right there if anybody wants it. And Johnny Reed. And I'm doing a West Coast signing tour, so if any of you are going to be anywhere in the West Coast, but I expect you're all local, yeah? Yeah, thought so.
Tell your friends in Victoria.
Yeah, and Vancouver. But yeah.
Well, I'm glad to hear that it's doing
No,
well.
it is doing really well. And it is a book that, you know, because I was, in the same way that I was writing a fantasy mythologization of the Arthur books in the Sulian books, I'm writing fantasy mythologization of my life in Among Others. And it really is the same. It's using material in the same way. And actually, when I was halfway through it, I thought, I hope I'm not going to get like I got with Arthurian and also with the Mitfords when I wrote the Small Change books, where I get really sick of them. Because it would be kind of hard. But then actually, you know, there's a lot of time in between 15 and 45. I'm not really that person. That was me, and it, you know, it was you in so much as it was you, but it's not really us anymore.
No.
I don't think I could have written it if I was any closer. I certainly couldn't have written it if my parents were still alive, because they sued me. Yeah. This is true, it's true. But I could have emotionally written it if they'd been alive, if it wasn't for the fact they could have sued me.
Well,
Yes.
it's turning straw into gold, look at it that way.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
So at this point, we'll open it up to questions, if people have things they want to say. Yes,
I would just like to mention that I thought it was interesting, because I read some of your stuff on tour.com, but I guess I missed the Bujal stuff. I've been doing a chapter-by-chapter reread of the Warclassing books
Oh, lovely.
on WordPress. I'm like about halfway through the Warrior's Apprentice right now, so so I just thought that was interesting to find out there was someone else. Because I'm seeing all
I've
these.
actually written loads about them though, because I as well as those, I made some gossip posts about them. Rather than reviewing Crowburn, I wrote a post about Aryl's whole life and about Miles's life to date, and I did Ivan as well. And I'm actually thinking about doing one about Simon Ilian, his life and career,
Okay.
and that kind of thing. Yeah. But they're all findable if you just search on the Bujal tag, they'll come up. Yeah. Chapter by chapter will take you a long time.
It's true.
Yeah.
But I've seen people going through like A Song of Ice and Fire and Wheel of Time and things like that.
Yeah, you're doing that.
You know, why do I do something that no one else is doing?
I'm doing that with the Patrick Rothfuss books, but I'm not doing one chapter at a time. I'm doing like technically I'm doing 5, but usually I do 6 or 7. If there are any short ones in there, or if I've got time. But there's a lot in those. I've got a great community on those as well, but there's a lot in those to talk about that isn't yet resolved. Whereas with Bujal books, we pretty much know where it's going and how it connects.
It's true.
At this point.
The speculation.
Yeah. I mean, there used to be, and Records As If Written, I remember we had a thread that went on for months. It was called Worried About the Future of Miles, when Mirror Dance had just come out. Long time ago now. Yeah. I love those books. I really love those.
That's not.
I've read the Small Change books, which I love. I was really fascinated by the sort of this 2 protagonist structure where you have the one,
Yeah.
the books, and that's a different second character. And now I've heard why you went with the second character.
Yeah.
Was it hard to make the leap or to have readers come along and with another character rather than continuing the first one?
Yeah. Some readers definitely wanted to find out what happened to Lucy more than they actually wanted to read a new book. And I very much didn't want to say. I mean, I do eventually say in Half a Crown what happened to them, but because I'd figured it out. Now, people would ask me all the time, it was a genuinely frequently asked question, they would ask what happened to Lucy and David, and I had a whole pile of funny answers to it. One of them was, sure they got to Montreal, I see them all the time at the bus stop. But yeah, yes, people had a problem with that, some people had a problem with it, but mostly people got used to it and were okay with it after they started doing it. My alternate title for the Small Change books is The Tragical History of Peter Anthony Carmichael. Because it occurred to me while I was writing Half a Crown, what Carmichael wants is to be a series detective in somebody else's series detective books. He would be so happy if he was a series detective in a normal set of cozy mysteries. That is his life's ambition. And I did these terrible things to him. Of putting him in this awful world, and he's gay, and really it's not a good world to be gay in, and bless him. I like Carmichael, but he is a good person who does bad things, and who goes along with bad things, and then tries to do good things, sometimes. You know, and once I had the idea for, my idea for doing sequels was that I would have 2 different female alternate chapter protagonists. And I knew right away, as soon as I was doing it, the one would be Elvira, which meant that I knew what was going to happen to Royston. I had all that figured out as soon as I had the idea of doing 2 sequels. And the alternating structure where I've got the odd-numbered chapters are the female first-person protagonist, and the even-numbered chapters are third-person Carmichael point of view, very much in the tradition of traditional detective stories. I call that ratcheting, because each chapter ratchets on the other chapter. And I find that it's a great way of getting some momentum in a story, and I had a lot of fun, well, in Farthing I had a lot of fun in doing it. In the others, sometimes it got difficult, but it gave me more than it took away. Even when a chapter got long and it would have to be split, and that meant that I'd have to put in another chapter. There are 2 chapters in Half a Crown that wouldn't have been there if it wasn't for that. Though that I think are some of the best chapters in it that work really well. The gay bar chapter wouldn't have been there, and I think it really needs that chapter.
I really like that because that aspect, because with the female story, you know, it's usually a personal story.
Yeah.
It's not a official story, and I think that first person really kind of reflects that. And then with his story, he can't be that self-questioning, or he wouldn't be doing the bad things.
That's
so
right.
it's impossible for him to be a first-person narrative.
Yeah, he could not be a first person. No, he just couldn't.
Yeah.
He almost has no first person. And they are all young, and he's increasingly getting older. And they are all silly and naive, though they each become much less naive as the book goes on. But they all start off as silly, naive girls, the female point of view, because that's the kind of way you can tell those stories, and that's the only kind of way that I can tell those stories. It was a deliberate choice, particularly with the later 2, because really with the first one, Lucy's voice is one of the first things I really had, and Lucy is naive, she's silly, but she's fundamentally good-hearted, and she's in fact quite wise. But she comes over as one of these really ditzy people, and I really liked doing her voice and her funny words for things, you know, and she calls her Macedonians and all of that, which I actually got from a biography of Daphne du Maurier. Daphne du Maurier was bi, and she called heterosexual sex Cairo and lesbian sex Venice. And she referred to lesbians as Venetians. And I just thought that was so kind of like, on the one hand, it's so sort of cutesy, but on the other hand, it gives you a different way of talking about it. So I just took that, I used different terms, but I took that idea from that and used it in filming. And that was kind of cool. That's one of the things I really enjoyed doing. Yeah.
Thank you.
No questions. You say that you get stuck often. Do you have specific things that you do to get unstuck? Or do you
Yes.
just kind of wait? Or
Well, it is as if I have a dripping tap. And sometimes it is a gushing tap that is gushing, yeah. And sometimes it is a dripping tap. And sometimes if I try to turn it, I'll just break the top off. And other times if I try to turn it, I can get it to turn some more. So and I have to know the difference, because also I'm very lazy. So you know, I can not work because I don't want to work, and I can not work because I can't work. Or I can be stuck because I'm trying to figure something out and my subconscious needs longer. Or other things. I hate being stuck, actually. Yeah, there's loads of things that I do to try to stop myself being stuck. And fortunately, I love writing. There are people who don't like writing, they just like being writers and having written. And I actually get a real rush from actually writing. I love it, it is the best. I would much rather do that than play Civ. But I can't make myself do it, like, you know, I can always play Civ. And so yeah, there's things that I do, and someone like Elliot says, if you really want to write, you can write sitting on the edge of the bath while somebody else is in the bath and talking to you. And if you don't really want to write, you can be in a wood-panelled study with ivy at the window and complete silence and the servants tiptoeing round, bringing you cups of tea, and you still won't be able to write. What I try to aim for is the in-between stage. No, because I really am like that. And if I really want to write, it really doesn't matter. But I can't only write when I really want to write, because I wouldn't write enough. So I've got to coax myself to write, and I've got to give myself good condition. The main thing I really need is to feel like I've got a lot of uninterrupted time. And it doesn't even have to, it's just psychologically uninterrupted time. So that sometimes if it's 10 in the morning and I've got till 5 o'clock, that feels like uninterrupted time. But other times, if it's 10 in the morning on a Monday and somebody's coming for the weekend on Friday, then I feel like I'm interrupted. So it's sort of psychologically clear, and that's important. And I try changing the record, I try using different bits of Bach if I've been stuck on one bit. I think what I need is a new piece of Bach I haven't played for ages, or that's completely new. And sometimes I'll go out and hunt for Bach that I haven't heard before. Bach wrote like so much because he was an entire spaceship full of aliens. There's Douglas Adams. But yeah, so sometimes that'll help. But it really does feel as if it's just a jam that comes unjammed and suddenly I can do it again. The disadvantage to doing the tour.com things, the great thing about that is that they pay me. And not only do they pay me, but they pay me every month. So it's like having a job, unlike writing, which is nothing like having a job. My husband has a job and he earns money. But since I've been doing this tour thing, which is like 2.5 years now, I get money every month. And I get paid per post, so it's a different amount of money every month depending on how many I've written. But it's you know, it's a decent, worth having amount of money. And it's $50 a post, so you know, that works out, it'll be $800 or $1,000. And that, you know, it runs out at the end of the month, it helps. And it feels like working when I write them, and I'm going to be paid for it at the end of the month. So my guilt of not having done any work isn't there if I've done that. And also I'm committed to doing a certain number of them, and I'm committed to doing like the Rothfuss post. And I've got to do that every week. So that can get in my way of feeling like I've got psychologically clear time. So I try to do tons of them ahead, so that I feel like I've got like 2 weeks that I don't have before I have to write, before I need to write another one. And also the reading the books to write about takes time, but you know, not a lot much time, but some time. And so I try to do that, and clear time that way so that I can do that. And I binge write, I always have binge written. There are people who say you should write every day, but I just can't write every day. It's not in me to write every day. And I write in binges, and I always have, and I probably always will. And it's just, it's good to know how you work. And probably you don't work like that, and that's good, but it's good to know, and so that you can make arrangements so that the way that you write works. And that. The other thing that I sort of do, which I always do, when I'm writing, I play records, I mean vinyl, okay. And the thing about this is that the side of a vinyl record is about 25-30 minutes, and when it stops, you've got to get up from your chair, walk over to it, lift this thing up, turn it over, and put the needle on it again. I'm just saying this in detail in case you are too young to have seen this. The great thing about this is you stop typing, and you can remember to do your hand exercises while you're doing it. And also, even if you don't remember to do your hand exercises, you've got up out of the chair and walked around and lifted the thing off. And it'll remind you that you might want to go to the toilet. And it's just great. And this is why I'm not at all interested in writing to CDs, or even worse, sort of like 700 hours of music on the computer, because getting out of the chair and turning the record over is really useful. It doesn't really interrupt me, because if I really don't want to stop, the music will just keep going in my head. I won't notice. But it's not like the computer cuts out or anything. It doesn't do it in the middle of a word, but it's just a little gentle reminder the music stops. I go turn the music over and do that. And so, if I am stuck, I will put the music on, and I will light a candle, which I only do when I'm writing. I love scented candles, and so this is a bribe. And I will put a writing necklace on, and I will put the record on, and I will sit in front of ProText, which is my magic writing software. I will sit in front of ProText until the end of that record, which is only 30 minutes, okay. But I'll sit there and try to write for the time that the music is playing, and I won't get up and do other things. And that sometimes works, because you can bore yourself into writing. And sometimes I do that as well. I'll like play endless Tetris until I'm really bored and bore myself into writing. And I once read, when I was stuck on half a crown, I read, I don't know how many books P.D. James has written, but it's about 50, and I read all of them. And you really notice the things that are wrong with them, because they are not all that good. But I bored myself into finishing half a crown by reading P.D. James novels. Yeah. So that sometimes that wouldn't work now, because I've got the tall things to write. So I can't be reading 53 P.D. James novels, or at least. If I wrote about them, people would be very annoyed. Oh dear, one of them was good. It's called Innocent Blood, the one that's good, if you're interested. But I wouldn't bother with the rest.
The one about the publishers?
No, that one's not good. No, it's the one about the girl who was adopted.
Oh.
And her real mother. That's the only one that I think is actually a worthwhile novel, rather than a piece of tosh that passes the time and bores you into getting on with doing what you're supposed to be doing. But yeah, everybody has their own way of writing and doing things, and I have something that is both a problem and an advantage, which I'm allergic to how to write books and people teaching how to write. It kind of brings me out in internal hives, and I get all itchy and squirmy and can't keep reading it. I really can't. And I think I've read 2 writing books all the way through. One is Ursula Le Guin's Steering the Craft, and one is Stephen King's On Writing, which is more of a memoir than a writing book, and it gave me nightmares. But I just can't read them. And because of that, I've never been formally taught to write, and I've never formally had the terms of how you write and the way that other people write. So I figured it all out for myself, and sometimes backwards, and sometimes kind of upside down. And sometimes I figured out things that other people hadn't figured out or hadn't formalized because they were all doing it the same way, and I was doing it my silly way. The character workshop this morning is one of the things that I do because I didn't learn to do it the normal way, and when I was thinking about teaching other people, that was a way that I thought of teaching other people, and as far as I know, nobody else does that. You know, and I thought of, I have a word, incluing, which means the way that you convey information within a text without stopping the story to tell it, the little hints that you drop through it. And I thought that this was a word, I mean, I knew I'd made it up, okay, but I thought that it was a term that other people had another word for that I didn't know. And I just made up the word because I didn't know the proper word because I couldn't read the books. But it isn't. It's something that nobody had ever quite formulated like that. It's got a Wikipedia entry. And it's under techniques of exposition, but and there's other things like that. But everybody is different. Everybody writes differently. You've just got to figure it all out for yourself. There's no shortcuts, and there's no shortcuts of not being stuck. And I wish there were. If anybody knows anything, yeah.
And on that note, one more question, but then we better, I think.
It's a very important question.
Yes.
What version of Civ do you play?
Actually, no, this is a writing answer. I play Civ 1 on my DOS computer because I write on my DOS computer, and if I really can't write, I sometimes don't want to switch my DOS computer on because I feel guilty because I'm not writing. And if I give myself permission to play Civ, I'll have my DOS computer on, and since it's on, I might as well look at the file. So Civ can actually be part of my work avoidance, work doing process. Emmett plays Civ 3 and Civ 5, but I pretty much only play original Civ that I've been playing since 1991 because I'm very old-fashioned and traditional, and unlike everybody else in the world, I don't want new stuff, I just want my old stuff to keep working. Sorry.
I'm a Civ 3 person.
Yeah, well,
I
so's
came
Emmett.
Civ 4.
Yeah, so does Emmett, but he likes Civ 5. Yeah. Yeah, but I don't want any of those new things. I like the way it works. Also, it's pretty. Civ 5 is pretty, but Civ 3 is really ugly. It's isometric backwards. Thank you for coming.
Yes, well,
thank you for asking good questions.
And we'll maybe see some of you back at the hotel,
Yeah.
or else
Oh, and I will be sitting on the table for an hour tomorrow in the morning. Come and talk to me because I will be bored. Bring things for me to sign if you would like them signed.
Just like Sims for me. You absolutely bet.
Yes, you totally did. So are you one of my really people?
I read it, but I haven't.
You haven't posted it, right?
I
Okay.
do enjoy it immensely.
Yeah, it's great. They're so good.
I
They
know.
do such great things. They
See, I read it at work, and then I feel horribly guilty about it.
I bought it off the internet. I can't remember the website.
Oh, wow.
Oh.
Oh, that is awesome. That is nice. It's got books on it. That's so great.
yeah, was that a wonder how?
Yeah. No, they are such a great group of people.
I am
You know, it's just such fun. And they come up with insightful things. That's why I
really
really
well.
well.
It turns out that many
Yeah, but I have had definitely
But no, it's great. I've really been having fun with it. It's but it's really, really fun. And they're a great community. You should post.
Yeah, I think you should. I have to stop reading it at work and reading it when I actually have time to post.
Yes, yes. Yes,
I
yes,
saw
that's
this
true.
picture chatting.
Yes,
You're still at the university. I think when I talked to you 5 years ago.
Yeah, no, it's just so good and such a lovely people. Did you see the comment a couple of weeks ago where somebody, I promoted somebody to earlier, and they said, oh, I'm so excited.
Right, yes. There was a thing in the paper with it.
And then somebody else says, I have the same problem, I couldn't explain it to my boyfriend. Oh, you too. You should be together.
Every back is like, last week, we did it, they all like actually blue.
Yeah, and miscarriage is always hot.
Diamond, I was like, well, he's getting
Yeah.
close to the
It's good to
No,
get
my
that
husband is.
Yeah.
black, see?
Oh, I see, just, so the black wasn't black.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I met him on,
They just
I met him on record session
colors
written
scheme everything. I sat
years
there,
ago,
printer
which was a
all
science
day,
fiction
and she's like,
discussion.
what's wrong with
Site on
you?
Usenet.
Well, this is
Yeah.
a white person. so
Yeah,
you should
no,
not
people
be-
talk about meeting on the internet, they
She's not
usually
through.
mean chat
These are
sites
veins
and dating
popping
sites. But no, I
I
met him
don't
on a
understand
site.
what's wrong with this.
Well, that's
She's a
the best.
brown person.
I think so.
Not a yellow
Yeah.
person, not a green
Yeah.
person.
I never even got to ask you about that, because that whole
Oh,
Usenet thing
so
was
these are actually,
fascinating.
there you go.
And I hadn't sort of
It's
discovered the
different
internet
from
at
the
that point, and I keep hearing about it like the lost paradise.
Yep. Yes, I misuse it. I misuse it all the
I
time.
should have done it.
But you know, some of the talk threads can do it a bit. Certainly the office one is doing that whole thing. They're such a great group of people. They really are. They are so clever and insightful and fun. I'm having such a good time with them.
I know, I'm so excited for that.
So I said, if you measure out my writing time, I'm wasting a lot of time with it. But fortunately,
Like being right again.
yeah.
Tried to explain to Dad.
Yeah, that was a good interview. That was fun. The point wasn't at all what you intended.
No
but
idea.
Well,
As I said, my costume
I had fun too, I mean, it's
Great
great.
looks.
Yeah.
I'm so excited. I have all the materials sitting at home.
Wow.
The house is still messy because I can't put boxes and it's six, so I have no space to cut the costume and to sew the costume.
downtown.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Still,
Not winners, but
here.
winners.
So
you know, we were reading the.
Giant flying
But you like Mrs. Blank, Spaghetti Monster, and I
Yeah, I think you can do a
His
better.
idea in my
Like
head
that,
that,
like, cake and cheese will actually look better.
Carmichael.
somebody
don't want to fight you.
Somebody fairly recently did one of those casting posts, I thought, with photographs of people. And I don't remember who they all were now, but except that they had,
It's very funny
It's sort of
saying about
business.
Moorville, because I grew up one town over.
the guy,
And I grew up during
The guy
evolution,
was-
right? Like, I had one of the first
the
female ads.
guy in Gosford Park who had actually
And it was
stopped
very
his
much-
father.
I do agree.
He's a
with
British
the
actor and he's
really
I
that
did
sense
say
of-
for it,
but
I
it's
said
the
I
same
remember.
process that people went through.
He's pretty well fooded.
Wait, I like.
Oh,
that.
yeah,
and,
he's
no, but,
I don't know his name as
no,
well.
but he was in Inside Job, and my husband would be very confused here because he knows who everybody's called. But anyway, they suggested that he could play Mark Normanby, and they linked to a photograph of him with his eyebrows. And I thought, he could really do it. I've twice
What I heard was good.
in the last couple of months.
Commonality. And that's the thing, it's peak and
interest
especially
from
the community in general,
because
having less content space.
and I've hated every day for my whole life. And there is no amount of money that will stop me being unhappy about
You
it.
know, like,
Yeah,
I
if
get
they
the
make
jokes,
it,
I don't watch it.
So I just said no. I said no to 20th Century Fox in the last week. 2 weeks ago.
But they're not reading the
But
same
anyway,
books, they're not.
what I said to my agent was, don't make a film of father. You could make a film
Yeah,
of
but they
father.
do.
You know, you're totally cool. And you could make it like a masterpiece theatre. Remains of the Day. You could make it like Remains of the Day. It would make a good movie. And like a
I
mother's
like
trying
anime,
to
you like
tell
anime.
Did you see the recent BBC Sherlock Holmes?
No, I've heard about it, but I haven't seen it.
Okay.
They came
Not okay.
Ben told us. It's a
Well,
great
I can't remember.
It's,
concept to bring that for the night.
Oh, we should say.
But it was with the horrible weather.
Yeah.
I don't think that's
Three
too bad.
kids and.
No, I want Merchant Ivory to make father. That's what I want. I want Merchant Ivory film father. And it would be, you know, as long as it don't change the end.
Were we going?
Because you really need the end. Yes.
Third grade.
When I was that young.
Actually, I thought at the end when I was
Mom always
halfway
wanted to
through,
do that.
and I was thinking, because I was writing really fast, okay. And I thought, you know, all the people in this book are really black and white. They're all
I
either really
loved
good or
Bonnie
really
Hughes,
awful.
and my brother was one
They're
of
really
the
black and white.
I
And
never
then I
did.
thought, well, it doesn't matter because comedy's going to solve the mystery and they're going to try
Yeah.
to go away.
I want to say that you did a great job.
It's never going to come out, you know. And then once I thought that, I couldn't stop writing. I just went fast until I got to the end because I was just dying to write that. Because nobody's ever done that. I couldn't think of an example of anyone. I don't think anybody's ever done that ever. Not in a things like a mystery.
Right.
And I just so wanted to do it.
Yes.
And then I figured out all how the structure of the rest of it went to the end. And I wrote it really fast.
I love
I
it.
look at that and she's, oh, that's horrible.
I wrote it in 17 days, and I kind of wrote the second half in like about 8 days. I wrote about a week.
There's about 6 books worth of.
I couldn't believe I'd done that. And honestly, my hands were terrible. I was doing 7,000 word days. Yeah.
Well,
And then I was in bed. I was in bed. I was like keeping my hands because my hands would, and I would stop myself, and then I would catch myself doing it again a minute later because my body was trying to my hands were awful. But I pretty much got them good again. I try not to write more than 3,000 words a day, or 4,000 of them most.
so as much as I like those books, we want you to know writing.
Yeah. Well, David Webb said I should get dictation software, but I could never write dictation software because it would just be completely different. Like I couldn't do it. But
There was a movie
the end
I was kind of considering.
is one of the things that I've written that I'm most proud of because it was not easy to make it work, and I really did make it work. I really did not want
We're just leading.
whether
We're not really here.
whether they're going to win
No, we don't see anything. Yes, plus
We want to lock up the room and turn out the lights.
That's what I
So we
was-
should at least move into the lounge area.
Yeah, we're going.
Is this somebody's backpack here?
Oh,
I really liked it. So that's
It's over.
oh.
So, Royce?